our financial statements. We are going to have an election of the new directors for the CCRAI, and then we are going to go into a new business section where we'll open it up for questions from the audience, and we'll announce next year's annual general meeting and adjourn from there. So this should take us probably about 20 minutes. So the first thing that I need is I need a motion to approve. First of all, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 10:05, and I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
This is Bob Tulabasi. I'll make that motion.
And
Okay,
could I have a second?
It's Ted Spence. I'm happy to second that motion.
Thank you. And any questions or discussion, anything to amend the agenda? Okay, Peter, can we put this to a vote for our members?
There we go.
So all in favor, vote yes. All not in favor, press no. All you have to do is just press the button in front of you for anybody that's on their screen.
Quite working.
I'm seeing the results. I'm not seeing the option to vote.
I agree.
I see 3 people that have voted yes.
Yeah, you just click on
Nobody's
the
voted
yes.
no.
We don't
Okay,
have,
so I'm gonna call that carried.
I'll share the results there. That's what we got.
Okay,
Yeah, but we didn't get a chance to vote.
yeah,
I think as you're a host, a co-host, Ted.
Oh, okay.
well,
Okay, now we're going to review the minutes of last year's annual general meeting, which was held on August 21st, 2021. And here are those minutes, if everybody wants to review them. I'll give everybody a moment. And so could I ask for a motion to approve the minutes of our annual general meeting held on August 21st, 2021?
This is Karina Luoma, and I will make that motion.
Thank you, Karina. And could I have a seconder?
this is Ivan Batty, and I will second that motion.
Thank you, Ivan.
I'll
Any
need to-
questions?
I'll launch
can
the
we put
poll
this
for
to-
you.
Can we put the motion to a vote, please?
There you go. They're coming in thick and fast
Now
now.
they're coming in. Okay, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop the poll. And there's the results.
Okay, that motion's carried. Now we'll move into the president's report. So over the last year, the Cavendish Community Ratepayers Association held 8 board meetings, all of them virtual. A couple of the key projects and files that we've been working on over the last year is we continue to monitor the municipality of Trent Lakes project regarding the facilities master plan, specifically around the dedicated mechanics facility located on County Road 49. Some of you may or may not be aware that there was a plan to build a dedicated centralized roadworks depot on 49 going back, started around 2015, and that project was looking like it was going to be at that time around $10 to $12 million. And we got very involved in the facilities master plan, a number of other consultant reports over the years, and we actually gave a recommendation to the township to combine fire halls and roadworks depots because we need to replace them all. And that was a project that would save the township probably about $15 to $20 million over the next 30 years. And they adopted that, but planned to then have, instead of a centralized depot on 49, go to a dedicated mechanics depot. And that is a project that has now gone out of scope because it was supposed to be a year ago, 7 to 10 million for all the facilities. And now the most recent report was the dedicated mechanics facility could be upwards of $10 million. So there is a lot of work being done at council to review that. We also do work very closely with the Ketchcoma Forest Stewardship Committee regarding the Minden Brandcroft Forest Company and their plan for the Ketchcoma Forest. As you know, there's been some logging going on up there. They are now not logging that area for this period. And we have asked and supported the Ketchcoma Forest Stewardship Committee's request of the government to try to reclassify that area so that it could get some protection for most of that area. We also continue to work on shoreline protection, which leads to lake and water quality. And part of that is coordinating the deep lake water testing that is done yearly by Trent University. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that during our cottage catch-up. We've also worked very closely with both Trent Lakes and the Coalition for Equitable Water Flow to provide support for the proposed Trent Severn Waterways Management Plan. The Trent Severn came out with a proposed or a draft management plan earlier this year, and we have supported the comments put forward by the Coalition for Equitable Water Flow, as has Trent Lakes. We also, over the last year or so, some of you may recall, we lost one of our sitting board directors, Jack Clark, who was a huge community builder and volunteer in Trent Lakes, mostly in the Cavendish area. And we did a delegation to Trent Lakes Council to gain approval to do a memorial reading room in the Helen Bowen branch at the Cavendish Community Center. And we also donated $400 in memory of Jack Clark to the Trent Lake Libraries. If anybody's in the library at the Cavendish Community Center, you'll see a memorial sign there, which will be there in perpetuity, recognizing Jack as a community builder and volunteer. We also had a public meeting and annual general meeting last year on August 20th. And then we had a public meeting on June 25th of this year. Some of the topics that and presenters that we had, Safe Quiet Lakes last year, we had the chair of that organization, Diana Paquette, give a presentation on Safe Quiet Lakes. It's an organization that started in the Muskoka Lakes area. And we're going to talk a little bit about it during our cottage catch-up, but it's really about how to protect our lakes and make sure they're enjoyable for everybody. We also have Paul Smith, who's the superintendent of the Kawartha Highland Signature Site Park, give us an operational update. Carol Armstrong in June gave us a Trent Lakes Municipal Update and Budget Review. And we also had in our June meeting, Riley Ann Schmidt from the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters to give us a very excellent presentation on invasive species in the Kawartha Lakes. It's very easy for invasive species to go from one lake to the other. Typically they go by boat, and we're going to have a section on that during our cottage catch-up as well. We also did a short presentation on the food cycler program. This is the project to eliminate organic waste out of our household stream. You may recall that we as a township have an excellent diversion rate. In fact, we're top in Peterborough County and probably in the top 10 in Canada. A lot of that driven by work done by our association, work with town council and a lot of the other associations going to clear bags and focusing on diversion with recycling. But the next big thing is the food waste. And the food cycler program is a great product for reducing organic waste. And then lastly, we always give water level updates. Everybody's interested in understanding what's happening with the water levels. And Ted Spence, who's the chair of the Coalition for Equitable Water Flow and a lake steward and one of our directors, also always gives those presentations. This is our new website for the Cavendish Community Ratepayers Association. We have the yearly application form if you want to renew your application. If none of your information changes, you can simply just e-transfer in your yearly membership fee. But if you're new or your information has changed, there's an application there. We post all of the recordings of our meetings and the presentations by our presenters. So if you ever want to go back and see them, so all the information's here on our website. And there's the application that we have, and we typically always have at the beginning of the year what meetings are going to be happening for the year. Okay, so next thing is moving on to our financial report. And here's the financial report for the Cavendish Community Ratepayers Association as of June 30th, 2022. So going back to last year, we had a cash balance of $7,912.50. Investments of $32.55 and 54 cents, and a little bit of petty cash. So our total last year was $11,282.64. This year we've received just under $2,500 in memberships. People continue to donate to our lake and water quality programs, which includes the deep lake water testing. We had marginal account interest. So total income for the year of $2,740.57. On the disbursement side, $2,574.07. Most of that is our directors and officers and liability insurance, which is about $1,800. Then we do have some other organization memberships. We're a member of the Coalition for Equitable Water Flow, FOCA, and NORCLA. And then we had some bank fees. So our total expenses for the year, $2,578.07. So our balance as of June 30th was $8,075. Our petty cash balance as of June 30th was $39.60. We made about $10 of income on top of our investments. So that took it up to $32.65 and 70 cents. So our total funds effective June 30th, 2022 was $11,380.30. And the board has a plan to put a little bit of money into more of our investments rather than just leaving it into our bank account. Total members as of August 20th. Unfortunately, I'm sad to say we only had 83 renewals this year, and we have a plan to try and get that upwards of 150, but we continue to struggle to get people to renew their memberships on a yearly basis. So with that, could I have a motion to approve the financial statements of the Cavendish Community Ratepayers Association for the year ending June 30th, 2022?
Gary, this is Les Clark, and I will make that motion.
Thank you,
Gary.
Les. And could I have a seconder?
Gary, this is Peter Raymond, and I will make the second motion for that.
Okay, perfect. And can we now put that up for a vote, Peter?
Yep, there it is.
Okay, and if people could vote to approve the financial statements.
Okay, going to share the results.
Okay, that motion's carried. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we're moving on to the election of officers. And our bylaws dictate that we have a minimum of 5 directors and a maximum of 11 directors. We have 10 directors nominated on the slate for this year. We do have 1 spot open. We have been actively recruiting and have talked to a number of people in the community. We haven't had any commitments, much like many of the other associations, lake associations, et cetera. We know volunteerism is a dying sport, but there are still people who are interested in helping out. If there's anybody interested in joining the board of the CCRAI, please contact me or any of the other board directors. Could I have a motion to elect the nominated board directors?
It's Lance Coulthard, and I'd like to make that motion.
Thank you, Lance. And could I have a seconder?
Yes, I'm Ian Cahoon, Mississauga Lake, and I will second the motion to nominate and elect the board of directors.
Thank you, Ian. And Peter, could you put that to a vote?
Sure. There we go. Okay, and here we'll share the results.
Okay, and that motion is carried. Okay, so now we're going to move into the new business section, and what we're going to do here is open up the floor to questions from our members. Before we go on to questions, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. Number one is, wanted to introduce my board for the people who may or may not know who they are. You just saw the slate. Ivan Batty is on Ketchcoma Lake. Les Clark is on Salmon Lake. Kathy David is on Beaver Lake. Carol Giles is on the Ketchcoma Narrows. Kevin Lee is on Mississauga Lake. Karina Luoma is also on Mississauga Lake. Peter Raymond is on the Misquizzibi River. Ted Spence is on Ketchcoma Lake up in Baldwin Bay. Bob Taylor Vasey is on the Mississauga River, and I'm also located on Mississauga Lake. And I want to thank the board for all their work and efforts over the last year. We've been working on a number of files, and there's a number of files that are currently still underway, which you'll see results from over the next year. And I want to thank them for that. I'd also like to note that, of our elected councilors, we have Carol Armstrong and Peter Franson on the call today. So I want to thank them for joining and appreciate their support of our organization. So with that, let's move on to new business. So Peter's going to unmute everybody. If you have a question, please just announce who you are and where you're located. So give your name and the lake or the road that you're located on, and then ask your question, and we'll direct it to the appropriate person to answer it. So
Yeah.
Peter, if you could unmute everybody, that would be great.
Yeah, they will have to go on their computers and unmute themselves. I've just allowed them to do that.
Any questions from anybody in the audience? Again, just remember, you have to, on your computer, unmute yourself and then identify who you are and where you're located and ask your question.
There's a question on the chat line, Gary.
Yeah.
So Peter's asking, is there a way, Peter Courier, he's on Ketchcoma Lake. He's asking if there's a way to automatically renew membership by pre-authorized annual direct debit. We would have to check with the bank, because we're, right now what we do is do e-transfer. Some people send in checks. But yeah, we could certainly look into that, Peter, with the bank to see if there is a way for us to automatically debit it. But we are, I'll have to think about that, because we're just kind of we don't have any automated currency systems or, electronic sales equipment or anything like that. So we'll look into that though, Peter. Thanks for that question.
Gary,
Okay, well-
a quick follow-up on that. It's also something that you can pay ahead for 1, 2, 3, 5 years.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And we do have some members who do send us a check for, $200, and they say, okay, we're good for the next 10 years. And then we're good from there. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is an option.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I'm Ian Cahoon, Mississauga Lake, and we're blessed on this lake not having hotel resorts or golf courses, but I do have an interest in night sky, and wanted to know, well, some cottagers feel a need to have security lighting on through the night until sunrise, which puzzles me a bit, security lighting on a lake in cottage country. But anyway, is there any interest on the part of the municipality to work towards some kind of night sky bylaw.
I'm going to defer that over to Carol Armstrong, who is our Galway Cavendish representative. And Carol, I don't know if you have any comments, if you've heard anything like that. And then, you know, if there's anything Peter might want to add after, but Carol, could you address that question?
Sure. And thanks for the question, Ian. I mean, I think this is something that we have an opportunity to do in our area, which is to see the stars at night, which is pretty exciting. The short answer is no, it has not come up at council. Is it worth considering? Absolutely. Is a bylaw the best way to approach it? I honestly don't know whether that's, the best way to do this or whether it's more community driven kind of initiative. But, again, worth considering. It just has not come up yet.
Are there any
Peter,
members
anything
out
to
there
add?
who are interested in that at all? As fellow cottagers? The issue of night sky and perhaps sometimes extraneous lighting at night, which might not be necessary.
I mean, it's Karina
Are there any
Luoma.
fellow members out there that are interested in this,
Yeah.
issue?
This is Les Clark, and for sure, I'm interested in that. Night skies are always something to enjoy.
I'm the same. It's Karina Luoma. I'm also very interested in that, especially for protecting our wildlife and the loons and herons who try to still navigate our waterways.
Yeah, and I should point out that we did last year have the presentation from Safe Quiet Lakes from Diana Piquette, and you may recall in her presentation a number of key points, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it, but they talk about the impact of wake and erosion on shorelines. They also talk about boat speed and boat noise and that, but they also, one of their pillars is nightlight on the lakes. And part of that is to educate people, much like we're doing with shoreline protection, to enhance lake and water quality. There's probably an opportunity for education for people, much like we've been doing in that area, to say, hey, you don't need to have lights pointing out on the lake or, all over your property. Your light should be pointing down, should not be projecting outward. And there's probably an opportunity for us to look at it from an education standpoint. So we'll make a note of that. Ian, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for
Can I
addressing my
interject
question,
here?
Carol. Appreciate it.
Can I put in a suggestion for that? It's Kevin Lee, I'm on Mississauga Lake. And I've switched to motion lights, so they only come on when you need them and go out within 2 minutes.
Another
And they're
good
solar.
idea.
They are solar lights, so they charge all day with the sun. I'm actually very impressed with them. They work quite well.
I'm Ruth
Thanks,
Ann
Becca.
McNaught. On Mississauga River, and I've noticed a lot of solar lights that just, break up the darkness. And for a while, I had noticed that the whippoorwill was not around my property, and I decided that it was because I had some solar lights out, and when I got rid of those solar lights, lo and behold, the whippoorwill is now singing on my property. So I think education is part of it. Just to be aware of the effects of our solar lighting and other lighting that is unnecessary.
Great
Thank
example.
you.
Thank you for that, Ruth. Any other questions from anybody in the audience?
Can I just add something, Peter?
Oh, look.
Gary?
He's coming back. Nevaeh, look. Say hi, Daddy. No, she's like,
Okay.
I'm not interested in you anymore. You can go back in.
Yeah, I got my chair.
Okay,
Okay, should we send
Peter,
him
why
out,
don't we
Nevaeh?
just mute everybody? I think we're
Should we
done
push
with
him
the
out?
questions.
Yeah. Gary, can I just make a comment?
Okay, everyone's muted again now, Gary.
There was one question that somebody wanted to ask.
Yeah, Robert Groen. Gary, you're
There.
muted too.
Gary, you're muted.
You're right, I am. Who is that last question from?
Robert Groen. Robert,
It's just
if
we
you-
were listening to someone down by the lake, so we had to.
Robert, if you unmute yourself, I think you can speak.
I'm just trying to see if I can find him here. Or if you have a question, please. Oh, there it is. Here we go. Go ahead, Robert. If you got a question, sound like you were going to ask a question. Just unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Sorry, I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay. Okay, if there's any other questions, if you could just put them into the chat, and if we don't see anything come in the chat, then we're probably going to move on. Now, there was one question about the 507 road construction and concerns about the quality. Carol, could you unmute yourself and just give everybody an update? Because I know you did some research on our behalf regarding the 507.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Gary. And don't shoot the messenger, please. It's been a disaster all summer, as we all know. It's been disruptive, it's dangerous, it's all kinds of things. I did ask the county for the rationale behind this. We had heard that it was done because the volume of traffic didn't warrant putting an asphalt surface, but rather a tar and chip surface, which is supposedly cheaper. So that was the rationale. There are several issues with that, and I will be introducing a motion to be sent to county. They based their traffic volume on a study that was done during COVID, which is obviously going to be skewed because people were asked not to travel during COVID. So that's flawed. The other thing is that if you look at the numbers which I asked for over a 75-year period of maintaining that stretch of highway, there is about a $3 million difference between asphalt and tar and chip. But when you break it down, it's only $40,000 a year. So I think in the scheme of things, it's a little bit, penny wise, pound foolish. So having said all that, we're stuck with it for now. It's been delayed because of some material issues, et cetera. But I will be bringing a motion forward for our council in Trent Lakes to go on record as being dissatisfied with it and requesting that the next cycle, the county gives serious consideration to an asphalt surfacing. One of the things we need to be better at is having stronger representation at the county council table. And that's really where some of those decisions get made. So that's all I can tell you. It's been an absolute disaster for the summer, and we've all had to suffer through it and probably will for a few more weeks. But it won't go unnoticed or unchallenged by this council, provided there's other support to bring forward that motion.
Thanks for that update, Carol. Appreciate it. Any last questions of anybody? If you want to put it in the chat or raise your hand. Otherwise, we're going to try and move on with our meeting. Not seeing anything in the chat. Not seeing any hands raised. Okay, so let me just move on to the next slide. So our next annual general meeting will be Saturday, August 19th, 2023. And if I could have a motion to adjourn.
Sorry, Gary.
Could I have
This
a
is
motion?
Karina Luoma, and I will make that motion.
Thank you, Karina. And could I have a seconder?
It's Kathy David, and I second that motion.
Thank you, Kathy. Any other questions? Okay, I see there's one question. If you could put it in the chat. Michael Bellams asked a question, so if you could put it in the chat, we'll answer it. But we're going to adjourn the meeting and move on to our public meeting. So here's our public meeting agenda. So what we're going to do is we're doing a cottage country update. Over the last number of years, there's been many new people moving into the area, both full-time and seasonal. And we found it that it was tough for people to find somewhere to get information that would allow them to kind of get through what they need to do and find out information. So we thought we'd put together this cottage country update. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Taylor-Vasey. He's going to take us through that presentation. Following that, we're going to announce the upcoming CCRAI meetings for the remainder of the year, and we'll wrap up for today at around 11:30. So Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thanks, Gary. So this session will take about 35 minutes. It should be at a pretty good clip, and it's meant to be informative without overwhelming anyone with too much data or things to know. It's geared to new seasonal and permanent residents. Well, it should also be useful information for long-term residents. We're going to concentrate on 9 topics. The first 3 are grouped under the category of municipal information. The second 3 are grouped under the category of the environment, and the last 3 deal with water. Each segment will follow basically the same structure. First, facts, because we are aware that other people don't know things or they're being fed misinformation. So facts, like what do we need to know? And then what does it all mean? And what should we consider moving forward? And finally, links to sources where you can research as much as you want at your leisure. This session will be on our website, as well as a comprehensive fact sheet that will list all of the links that will allow you to learn more. This session is a great example of the benefit of a CCRAI membership, because when we learn of new studies and receive new reports on important issues, we can provide those to our members through our email distribution list. If you're not a member, or if you have not renewed your membership, we encourage you to sign up. So our first speaker on the aspects of municipal challenges is Carol Armstrong, who is our ward council for Galway Cavendish. And she's going to kick us off talking about a Good Neighbor initiative. Over to you, Carol.
Great. Thanks very much, Bob. And thanks for organizing this entire module. I think it was timely and it was a lot of work, but I think it's appreciated. So I'll start with a little humor, which is not my strong suit, but if you can remember when you first moved to this area or you first started coming to a cottage up here, you probably felt a little like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. And I think you can appreciate the fact that when you live in a city or the suburbs, you don't have to worry about where you get your water, what you do with your septic, how you get your hydro, etc. So as beautiful and wonderful it is as it is living in cottage country, it also comes with a number of challenges. And I think those are some of the things we're going to focus on today. So next slide, please, Peter. There we go. Thank you. So let's start. No, oops, if you can go back one slide, please. There we go. Thank you. So some of you may recognize this snapshot of this mailer or this document. The municipality put together a kind of a crib sheet of things that you need to know while you're up here in cottage country. And they relate to things that are important to not only protect our environment, but also to protect the quality of life that we enjoy in being a good neighbor. So this mail out, which you should have gotten with your tax mailer in the spring, speaks to things like animal control, keeping your pets on a leash and on your property, when you can use fireworks, noise, because as we all know, noise up here travels extensively over water and can be a real nuisance, outdoor fires, parking, property standards, as well as waste and recycling and boating safety. And I know that Bob and Karina are going to speak to a couple of these a little bit later in the program. So if you can just go to the next slide, please, Peter. So not only is it common sense to manage those things we talked about earlier, but the municipality has introduced bylaws, and they're intended to really help us, as I said earlier, protect the environment and protect our quality of life. So just so you know, there are property standards bylaws in terms of how you maintain your property, parking bylaws about where you can and cannot park, fireworks, as you, I think, know, we introduced one so that you can only set off fireworks 4 weekends a year in consideration of pets, people, and the environment. There is a burning bylaw, which I think Bob will speak to a little bit later. A noise bylaw, so there are hours within which you can, you shouldn't be making noise to disturb your neighbors, even if it's construction or lawnmowers or whatever. And finally, how you manage dogs and kennels. So next slide, please. So we've all encountered a situation where our neighbor or someone across the lake is being unreasonable, having late parties or setting off fireworks or having fires when they shouldn't. The very best approach, I think we all know, is to try and deal with it with that person. It's a neighbor dispute. People are reasonable if it's brought to their attention, but sometimes it's outside of our control. And in that case, I encourage you to report a complaint. And the net around which you can do that, during the weekdays, call the municipality. We have just hired a full-time bylaw officer who is new and great, and I'm hearing good things about him. If the problem arises during the night or on weekends, we've also introduced a 24/7 call center. So call that number that you see on your screen, and they will record it. And if it's an emergency, forward it to the appropriate person. If it's a non-emergency but requiring police, it's a theft or property damage or something, please call their non-emergency number. And of course, finally, at the highest level of concern, if it's an emergency, call 911 and they will dispatch police or fire to your location right away. And you may not know, but our fire department, about 70% of their calls are for medical emergencies. So they are there first on the scene, and they do respond to those 911 calls. And if you're looking for links for this information, next slide, please. Two things that might be of help to you. First, there is a bylaw guide for residents, which takes you through the major bylaws that you're likely to be affected by, as well as the enforcement process and how to file a complaint. And secondly, you can get an e-copy of the Good Neighbor mailer that I showed earlier by going to that link. So thank you for that. And now let me move on to short-term rentals, which has been a hot topic over the last 4 years. In Trent Lakes, we know that we have at least 300 properties that are rented out on a short-term basis. And that's from a survey that we put out. But that survey had a 25% response rate. So those of you with your calculators say, oh my God, there could be 1,200 short-term rentals in Trent Lakes. My sense is there's probably 600 to 800 short-term rentals in Trent Lakes, and that represents about 8% of all of the dwellings that we have. And it's growing. We know this, we've seen the data, and maybe surprisingly, it's growing faster in rural areas than in urban areas, largely because, well, COVID has driven some of that, but also we just don't have enough commercial accommodations to support the number of visitors who want to come here. We all know the cons of short-term rentals. They're noisy. People often have no regard for the neighborhoods. They don't understand the sort of norms and bylaws. But there are some pros for short-term rentals. They do provide a source of revenue for people who want to offset some of their expenses for taxes and repairs. What we do know is that most owners who rent out their property are responsible. The problem is the few that are not responsible create major nuisances and issues for their neighbors. And so there needs to be some measure of control over that. And if you go to the next slide, please. Municipality studied this issue quite extensively, and some of the considerations around it are we still want to give property owners the option to rent out their properties. That is their right. It's an asset that they can monetize, and it serves a good purpose. Secondly, we do want to minimize any of the public safety risks around these properties, including noise, garbage, and parking. Thirdly, we found out there are some very polarized opinions about short-term rentals in our community. A little over half don't like them, want them tightly controlled, but just slightly under a half really think the government has no role to play in this. So it's a challenge of balancing those two positions. And finally, number 4, the approach taken was a measured one. So we have a plan that will be phased in over 3 years, not only so that it can be done gradually and accepted, but also so that we can sufficiently staff it and resource it. And here are the 3 stages. So this year, the approach is to educate, and you saw the Good Neighbor mail out, which is a part of that, to beef up our monitoring, so our tracking and our reporting of complaints that come in about short-term rentals, and our enforcement. And you saw we just hired a bylaw officer, that's new, and we've tightened up our contracts with our outsourced enforcement partners. Next year, we'll be looking to introduce an overall nuisance bylaw, which is a common thing in some larger municipalities, as well as a penalty system that would take the control out of the courts and put it within the municipal jurisdiction. So it'll be faster, more efficient, and less expensive. And then in 2024, the council at that time will review and look at the need at that time and the resources required to proceed with licensing, because ultimately licensing is the only way that you can fully hold owners of short-term rentals accountable. And that's to be determined how and when as we get there. And so if you'd like to learn more about that, I think the next slide shows you some places to go. So on the municipal website, you can go to that site. It has all of the reports that were done about this. It has the bylaws, et cetera. So you can find out the entire background. On a provincial level, Ontario has put out a home sharing guide, which also reviews what other municipalities are doing around short-term rentals. Unlike Quebec, in Ontario, every municipality is left to determine its own solution that best meets its particular and unique situation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Okay, thanks, Carol. As most of us know, Carol is well known for her ability to deliver succinct presentations. Thank you again. In the next component, next slide, Peter, please. In this component, we're going to turn our focus to fire protection and fire prevention. In an urban environment, fire officers are at the fire station waiting to respond to a call. In Trent Lakes, our fire department is mainly staffed by volunteers, people like you and me, dedicated but on call. The geographical size of the municipality means that response to a fire can take up to 45 minutes. And the recent fire on Mississauga Lake is an example of that. In other words, emergency response for fires may not be of much help. So prevention is paramount because the option is predictable and potentially devastating. Next slide. Next slide, Peter, please. Peter, can you go to the next slide? So what can we do or consider doing to mitigate the risk and the impact of fire? One is to talk with residents in your general area about an emergency response plan. Do you have the cell numbers and email addresses of your neighbors should you need their help immediately? Second, think about having a communal fire hose where fire protection can be initiated quickly without having to wait for the trucks to arrive. Third, keep your campfire locations safe to reduce the possibility of root fires. Root fires can cause significant damage, and the link on the next slide explains everything you want to know about root fires. And fourth, keep your fire within prescribed limits. We had a fire on the river about 2 weeks ago that had to be 8 feet high. It's clearly incredibly irresponsible. And finally, talk about the impact of proper fire prevention with your insurance company. Under what conditions would your losses not be covered? We know that it is mandatory in this township to have a fire permit, and it is mandatory to phone before you set a fire. If you don't do that and you have a fire, will your losses be covered by your insurance company? So it's a useful discussion to have with your broker. Next slide. These are the links. These are 4 links. There's the bylaw. There's the municipal bylaw on air burning, how you get a fire permit, which also has it in the rules. A link to Trent Lakes Fire Services and what they do and what they provide. And finally, a really outstanding article in Cottage Life in 2019 on how to prevent a root fire. Root fires tend to burn for a few days underground, and then they go up to the trees. And it's important to have a campfire that is not right on the ground because that's where the roots are. Next slide. I'm going to introduce Karina Luono. Karina is a member of the board, and Karina was my co-conspirator in putting this whole session together. She's going to lead us through the 3 components of that cover the environment. There could be, and there probably are more, but we wanted to focus on 3 of them. So, Karina, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob. Trent Lakes, as you heard, has the highest diversion rate in the county. At the Cavendish transfer station, the recycling bins are full every week. Clear bags are mandatory, and we keep our garbage and recyclables separate. The attendants will remind you, and they are just doing their job, but there has been incidents of conflict. And I think that's all our job as owners and responsible for renters to make sure that they do this sorting and have the card available. In 2022, the municipality is conducting a second pilot on organic composting, the Food Cycler program. The first pilot had exceptional success. In Trent Lakes, we separate recycling by either containers or fibers. Getting rid of household items you don't want anymore, take them to the reuse center at the transfer station. It could be a gold mine for someone else. I know my husband, gets his back up when I keep coming home with something new that somebody else has gotten rid of, but that can add value to my household here. Make a point of recycling collectibles in the reuse center and electronics. It keeps them out of the garbage and there is no charge. Think about holding a community cleanup day on your fire route. The amount of garbage on the side of our roads is significant. Make sure you are on the municipal notification list for waste. It really is a great way to stay current on any changes in rules of transfer station times or environmental waste days. If you rent your place out, make sure you leave the cottage kit visible so that your renters know what to do. It can be a real headache for the attendants. And these kits only cost $3 at the transfer station, and I believe you can buy them at the municipal offices as well. I forgot to tell you to go ahead with the slides, Peter, so you can go ahead to the links. Next slide. And here are links if you're interested in knowing more about the Food Cycler program and again, the cottage renters kit. Next slide, Peter. Originally, we were going to restrict this to the county's septic reinspection program, but in reality, there is a direct connection between septic systems and public health. In the city, we have wastewater purification plants. Up here, our septic tanks are the best we have to keep our water quality high. Poor or leaking septic systems are a significant cause of algae and poor water quality. And the reinspection program has identified a 10% failure rate. Our water quality is high, and as you will hear later, is tested on a regular basis. So I realize the plan is 5 years going across all of our lake systems, but just be mindful of when they reach out to you and complete your one-page survey, I think it was. And then it is a good practice to be on site when the inspectors visit so that you can ask and be informed of any questions or recommendations they may have. Next slide, Peter. So what do? Ensure that we are not putting materials into our septic tanks that interfere with the purification process. That stuff like detergents and grease, we all know. Let's let the good bacteria do its job in the tanks. Ensure our tanks are pumped out every 3 years or more often if needed. Next slide, Peter. And there's the link for everything you ever wanted to know about septic systems. And next slide, Peter. Of all the topics we will cover today, the next one is the most serious with really frightening ramifications, and that is invasive species. They are a significant problem in the canal lakes and are all around us, even in Picard. Check it on this map. We are in danger. I think you have a map there, Peter, that you can put up. And our focus is on boats that can bring invasive species in. The province is mandating the use of boat wash stations, but there are very few boat wash stations in Trent Lakes. Boats need to be cleaned when they are taken out, not put in. And one of the key ahas for myself was the boats need to be cleaned, washed, and dried before transporting to the next lake system. Let's leave the bad stuff where it is, because once it gets into our water, it is here to stay. And boats, for those of us who need gentle reminders, is anything that floats. That means canoes, kayaks, and paddle boards. Next slide, Peter. There are a few in particular to watch out for. In our link section, you will learn what these look like, and I encourage you to do so. The spiny water flea, zebra mussels, quagga mussels, Eurasian milfoil, and starry stonewort. Next slide, Peter. Let's look at what we need to consider and what to do about it. Invasive species affect everyone, not just the owner of a boat transferring something into our water. Make sure that you clean your boat at source, and that if you are renting, your renters aren't bringing something in. Support scientific testing of our waters. More on that from Ted Spence later. And know that Trent University is a leader in aquatic research. It's just another aspect of being a good neighbor. If you see something suspicious, take a picture of it and send it to the appropriate agency. For who that is, check out the CCRAI meeting presentation in June. It's all there. And the next one, Peter. So here is the links to help you find out more about what I addressed here for your information. And have a wonderful day. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Karina. So the last component of this session focuses on water. And the first two sections are going to be described by Gary Juros, our erstwhile president. So he's going to talk about shoreline protection and safe and quiet lakes. And when he's finished, I will then introduce our last contributor speaker, Ted Spence. So Gary, over to you.
Thanks, Bob. So the first thing that we're going to do is talk about the Love Your Lake program. Now, I'm not seeing the slide up. Is everybody seeing the slide up?
Not yet.
No, I see you.
I see you, yeah.
Yeah. Peter, could you put the slide back up, please? Our slide deck moved down. While Peter's getting that slide deck back up, let me just talk a little bit about it. So some of you may recall back in 2017, we rolled out the Love Your Lake program. And that really was after a number of years of looking at one of our key pillars, which was lake and water quality. Peter, we got to go up a couple slides to Love Your Lake. So, and that's one of the key pillars of the Cavendish Community Ratepayers Association. The reason why we are all up here is because we treasure and want to protect our lakes, because without them, we really have nothing. We just have, forest properties. So having good lake and water quality is very key. The Love Your Lake program, which we rolled out in 2017, we had over 1,200 shoreline properties assessed by experts to look at the degree of naturalization of those shorelines. Science shows that a lake must have at least 75% naturalized shoreline. Otherwise, it starts to negatively affect the lake and water quality. So because we're so focused on that, we did this. We did it across 12 different waterways. So all the way from Galloway and Pencil Lake, all the way down to the Mississauga River and everything in between. So we did 12 waterways. And it was an excellent program. Everybody got an individualized report on their property. And I'm happy to announce that virtually every lake was at least 75% naturalized or regenerative, which means that it's coming back to naturalized. There were a couple of exceptions where they were just slightly below 75, but there was nothing that was alarming. But the good news is that everybody got an individual report on their property. Hopefully all of you downloaded it and got it. And what it did is it talked about your property and also gave suggestions on how to further naturalize and improve your shoreline. The key thing there is the riparian buffer. That is the natural shoreline between your property and the lake that effectively filters out all of the man-made and natural contaminants that can negatively affect the lake. So the key thing to remember here is that we want to have at least 75% of the shoreline naturalized. So when you go around in your boats and you see properties that are lovely manicured grass right down to the lake, that is not good. What you want to see is lots of normal native vegetation, trees, etc. And that's what we should all be working towards. And again, it is an education program, no different than anything else. The more people who know about it, the more people talk about it, and the more we'll see people start to naturalize their shorelines versus clearing the shoreline so that they can have a great view of the lake. My position is, I love looking at the lake, but I prefer when people who are driving by in their boat can't see us. And the best way to do that is leave all the trees and the vegetation up. Okay, if you could go down to the next slide, Peter. The next program we want to talk about is actually an organization. It's called the Land Between, and many of you will be familiar with them. We have done a number of partnership programs with the Land Between. And what the Land Between does is they are effectively looking at how to protect the lake, the land, and the habitat. So they're looking at the lake, they're also looking at the land, and they're looking at how it impacts habitat for wildlife and endangered species. So as an organization, we've run a number of programs with them. They partnered with us on the Love Your Lake program, phase 2, which was to provide natural shoreline plants, which we had a sale at one of our AGMs and many people bought them. And then they got advice on how to plant them and where to plant them on their property. The Land Between really recognizes the area that we live in here, which is effectively from the border of the cities all the way up into Northern Ontario, where we have very, very unique topography, rock formations, habitat for wildlife, and also different species. And this organization does a number of different programs around that. But the one that's of interest that we partnered with them was on the shoreland gardens, how to naturalize them. They also do things like how to grow grape pollinator gardens, bird-friendly gardens. And as mentioned by Karina, because of the advent of invasive species, they're now actually talking about how to remove invasive species from different lakes. The Land Between does a lot of these programs through education. They have a lot of subject matter expertise, and you can actually hire them to come out to your property to evaluate it and give you a design for shoreline naturalization. So how to put a naturalized shoreline in, and they will actually do the planting, provide all the plants and everything. And the fees are very, very reasonable. I know a number of people who have engaged in Land Between, and their chair, Leora Berman, does an excellent job. So we'll provide a link to the Land Between, and we encourage you to take a look at the Land Between if you're looking at doing shoreline naturalization. Next slide, please, Peter. Back up one, sorry. So I also talked about in our presentation that the Cavendish Community Ratepayers Association does coordinate deep lake water testing on our lake systems. And we do this deep water lake testing for a number of reasons. One is we have over the years always done E. coli and Secchi disc, and there is some phosphorus testing, which we'll talk about on our next slide. But the deep water testing looks at things like clarity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, phosphorus levels, calcium, chlorophyll. The key thing here is when you can start to track data over a number of years, it allows you to proactively identify problems earlier and allow you to understand what the long-term dynamics are of those changes. So what we're trying to do is track data to see, is there anything that's coming out of this data that would tell us the lake's moving in the wrong direction, and what can we do to impact it? This program is run by the Trent Aquatic Research Group, and that's why it's called the TARP, Trent Aquatic Research Program. It's coordinated through Paul Frost, who we had as a presenter a number of years ago. We also had a couple of his graduate, postgraduate students presenting on a lot of their findings on our lakes. We are doing this testing currently in Salmon Lake, Picard Lake, Pencil Lake, Ketchcoma, Mississauga, Gold, Beaver. We're not currently doing it in McGuinness or Cavendish, but we have also done it in the Mississauga River. It's an excellent program. The cost per lake is $200, and every one of the lakes has been participating in this over the last number of years, and we're starting to collect a lot of data, which is excellent. So if we could move on to the next slide. And then the last organization that everybody should be aware of is the Kawartha Lake Stewards Association. They're all about protecting the natural beauty around us, and specifically they look at the water. So they monitor all the lakes in the Kawartha area. So they do more than just the Trent Lakes. They also do a number of the lakes on the Trent Severn, and they monitor the lakes for yearly changes in phosphorus and E. coli. They've been doing this for a couple of decades. And the key thing here is what they want to do is educate all the residents, whether they are seasonal or year round, and the general public, so all the visitors, about how to protect the Kawartha Lakes. And every year they produce an annual report on all the lake data. And what it does is, again, it allows us to track phosphorus levels and E. coli, and they're actually now doing some work on invasive species as well. So, again, the key theme here is we are trying to figure out how to maintain the lake and water quality. And so that looks at how do we get better data and how do we monitor invasive species? So those are really the key themes. So most of our lakes do have a lake steward, so they are associated with the Kawartha Lake Stewards Association. And we thank those people for volunteering their time and doing the testing that they've been doing over the last couple of decades and tracking it. So let's move on to the next slide. So then, along with the theme of protecting lake and water quality, is how do we not only protect lake and water quality, but also keep our lakes safer and quieter for sustainable enjoyment. And that's what Safe Quiet Lakes is all about. And some of you were at our AGM last year would have remembered Diana Paquette talking about this. And the key pillars for Safe Quiet Lakes is they want lakes to be safe for all users, regardless of what they're doing, whether they're swimming, kayaking, or motorboating, or water skiing. And what they look at is how do we educate people, seasonal, full-time visitors into the lake, to make sure that they are not doing things that adversely affect the quality of the lake. One of the big things that they have found over the years is wakes on the lake and how they affect shoreline and shoreline erosion. And that's problematic because if the shorelines erode, we lose that natural vegetation. And remember, the key thing is we want to have 75% or more of our shorelines to be naturalized. And if we're having shoreline erosion, we could potentially lose that. Safe Quiet Lakes also talks about speed of boats and where those speeds should be monitored and where people should address different speed limits. So it's no different than, people figure out if they slow down that they're not going to create a lot of weight to the shorelines when they come into like marinas and things along those lines. Well, there's only two ways that you don't make wake. It's either full out or it's dead slow. Anything in between, all you have to do is look behind your boat and you can see the wake coming in. And unfortunately, a lot of boaters still have not attuned to that, that says, if you want to slow down and move into an area and not have weight going and affecting people's boats, shoreline and docks, you have to be dead slow. Another key pillar of theirs is the noise out on the lakes for some of the boats. There are boats out there where they take the exhaust systems off, and organizations like Safe Quiet Lakes are working with Transport Canada to see if they can create legislation around the requirement for boats to have exhaust systems and to make it illegal to remove them. And then earlier in our presentation, you heard about them talk, you heard the discussion around nightlight, and Safe Quiet Lakes is also looking at that because that has an impact on lakes as well. If people are having, you know, a lot of light moving out into the lakes, that takes away the naturalization of lakes. So we really need to figure out how to better monitor the use and how lights are projected out in the lake and try and keep them on land. So the key thing here is, again, better protection of lakes, better protection of shorelines, and enjoying the lakes for every user of it. And if you want to move on to the next slide then, Peter. And here are some links, and these, again, this presentation will be posted on our website and the recording will be there. If you have any interest in any getting additional information, here are the key links for it. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Bob to introduce our last speaker.
Thanks, Gary. Well, certainly the aspiration of doing this in 35 minutes was unrealistic, but I think that it's been a good pace and there's a lot of information, and I think so far been at the right level. Our final speaker is Dr. Ted Spence. Now, Ted is a professor emeritus of environmental studies at York. He's chair of the Coalition for Equitable Water Flow. He's a former chair of the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association and connected with a quite large number of other network organizations. And he is effectively, for us, our resident expert on all things water. So Ted's in an unfortunate situation because it's 11:15, almost 11:20. He's the last speaker, so he's really under the gun to get us to 11:30 where we can close the meeting. So there's the challenge, Ted. Go for it.
Ted, you're on mute.
I got it. Okay. What happened here? Why am I?
Ted, click on your slide and the navigation buttons will show up in your bottom left corner, and then you can navigate up or down in your slides.
Okay, there we go.
See it at the bottom left? And they're in white.
I got it now. Okay, can people see that slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so Bob and Karina asked me to do three things. To talk first about how and why our water levels get managed, a quick overview of where we are in terms of water levels at the moment, and a quick overview of the ongoing water quality monitoring on our lakes. So when we talk about our lake levels and the way they're managed, especially on the Mississauga chain of lakes and on Crystal Lake and on Anstruther Lake, these are all reservoirs of the Trent Severn system. And it's important to recognize how we fit into a very large complex system. The Trent Severn waterway extends from Georgian Bay all the way down to Lake Ontario. It's about 400 kilometers long. There are 45 locks, and there are more than 100 dams in the system. When we talk about the reservoirs, we're talking about the Gull River watershed, the Burnt River watershed, and what we call the Central Lakes, which is Mississauga, Crystal, Eels, and Jack Lakes watersheds. I should say I'm going to move quickly over some of these slides. They will be posted on the website, so you can go back and look at the information if you want to. When we talk about the reservoirs, there are 35 reservoirs in the Trent Severn, and 17 of them are in the Gull River system, 13 of them are in the Burnt River system. In the Gull River system, there's 3 branches of the Gull River. They all converge north of Minden, creating some very complex flow patterns that then drain down to Balsam Lake and in certain seasons present a real flood hazard to Minden itself. In the Burnt River system, we have 13 reservoirs. They tend to be smaller. More than 50% of the Burnt River is not really controlled at all. It drains down to Cameron Lake, and it's subject to very flashy flows in the downstream sections. And then we have 5 Central Lake reservoirs, if you like, in our area, and that's the Mississauga chain of lakes, Anstruther, Eels, Jacks, and Crystal Lakes. Crystal Lakes, of course, is also in the municipality of Trent Lakes. This is a diagram that I don't expect you to be able to read. I only put it up to emphasize how complex the system is. All of these black bars and the blue bars are the dams that exist in the system. The blue part of the system is the canal, is the Kawartha Lakes down through Peterborough and on down to Rice Lake and all the way out to Lake Ontario. The reservoir system is very complex. It's up here with our more than 35 dams. This is the Gull River system with its 3 branches converging at north of Minden here. This is the Burnt River system, and the whole downstream section and the main stem of the Ironstone have Arndale have no control. And then here's our Central Lakes here where we are located. And what's happening, Gary? I can't go ahead. There we go. So this is the Central Lakes area that we're in. So here's the Mississauga Dam controlling Catchacoma, Beaver, Gold, and Cold Lake. And here's Anstruther emptying into Gold or Little Gold Lake. Eels straight to Stony Lake, Jack Lake straight to Stony Lake, Crystal Lake down through Bass Lake and into Pigeon Lake through the Nogies Creek. And of course, there's the Misquogue-Zibby River in here as well, but it doesn't have any controls on it. So it's a very complex system, and it's important to see how we fit in such a large complex system. The decisions on how to manage the water levels are made on a daily basis based on intensive analysis of current data. This is a map from Trent Severn that shows their monitoring network. They have about 100 water level gauges through the system, 35 of them in the reservoir area. They have over 20 rain gauges that are recording live with actual data. They're continuous recording gauges for rain, and 9 of those are in the reservoir area. They also have a series of half a dozen snow water equivalent gauges that allow them to measure exactly how much water is in the snowpack throughout the winter, and 3 of those are in the reservoir area as well. This is a, oh, I'm sorry about the, yeah, sorry about the words here.
I don't think so.
I'm going to skip over that, but basically what that slide was showing, and those were the words of the water manager. It's showing that all of the data that's collected is collected with live measurement, especially the water levels. It's then transmitted continuously, some of it by satellite, some of it by phone line, directly to the office in Peterborough, where it's analyzed continuously, and daily decisions are made on how to manipulate water levels at each of the dams. The water levels in the Trent Severn system are subject to certain priorities, though. We have integrated water management at the watershed level, which means everybody's a stakeholder, including the reservoirs, which didn't used to be the case, but it certainly is now. But they also have priorities. The top priority is public safety, and then canal navigation. And public safety is flood risk mitigation, especially in the spring. They must, in terms of water supply management, they must maintain a minimum flow at Peterborough for municipal water supply and also for sewage treatment. They must maintain a minimum depth as advertised in the canal system. And at the same time, they manage the reservoir levels with as much as possible within the historic norms and subject to what they call equal percentage drawdown, which means all of the reservoirs share the contributions to the downstream sections in an equal proportion. They also recognize fisheries constraints, things like walleye spawning in spring that cause them to maintain flows, and in the fall, getting the water levels down by, and this is important for us, getting the water levels down by the 15th of October, so that when the lake trout spawn, the water levels will not fall any further over the winter, and subject that the lake trout spawn, when it's normally in shallow water, if the water level keeps dropping, then there's a risk that the spawn will either freeze or dry out over the winter. So that's
Ted,
why. That's
Ted,
why.
we got 5 minutes left.
That's fine. That's why we take it down when we the way we do. It's important to recognize the reservoirs are not a flood control system. Now, I want to just quickly say, where do you find the latest water level information? Well, I'm biased. I say go to the Coalition for Equitable Water Flow website, cewf.ca. Top right-hand corner, you click on the water level website, and that will take you to the Trent Severn water level pages. Here's the Mississauga graph as of August 17th. You can see we're tracking pretty much on the orange line. The orange line is the 30-year average. We had a blip back in June when we had very high levels, almost the highest we've ever had at the end of June. But right now our water level is declining about 1 centimeter per day. You'll notice when you're on the water level graph with Trent Severn, you can either look at the graph or you can look at the table. Most people don't look at the table, but if you look at the table, it shows you the last 30 days. And you can see here how fast the water level's going down. And right now it's going down only 1 centimeter a day, and it's running right normally on the long-term average. The other thing you can look at from the CEWF website is the drawdown forecast. And the drawdown forecast is posted normally on Tuesdays. It looks like this. You can look at the Mississauga Lake. You can see that the current water level. You can see the projected water level 14 days out. So it's a rolling forecast. And then the target differential will show you that this last 2 weeks ago, the estimate was that we were going to lose 20 centimeters over 14 days, so just a little more than 1 centimeter a day. And that's what we've been experiencing exactly on. But we're also seeing more and more variation from month to month in terms of average precipitation. For example, in August this year, in this month, in the first 10 days of the month, we'd already had a whole month's rainfall. And with climate change, what we're seeing is more and more variability. And we have to be prepared for that.
Reception may go in and out. You'll get it.
Okay. Now I put in 2 or 3 pictures of the dam here, just for those of you who've never been there. I mean, our dam was totally replaced in the last 10 years. It has three main spillways here. But I wanted to show you, this is what it looked like in June this year when we had very high water levels. For a period of time, we were within about 5 inches of going over the wing wall. It was truly, we were at record high levels. And here's the dam at that time of year downstream. The dam is made up of 1-foot logs, 12-inch logs, 33 centimeter logs, and one log that is half that height. So as right now, for example, the normal function here is to take 6 logs out before fall. Right now we have 3.5 logs out of our dam. Here's what it looked like 10 days ago. You can see the water level's much lower now, and there's lots of capacity then in the lake to store water. Now, the other thing I want to touch on is water quality studies, and Gary already mentioned some of these, but essentially most of the lakes in our area participate in 2 different water quality initiatives. The first is the Lake Partner Program, which is a program of the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and FOCA, the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations. And you can go to the FOCA website to find the links to the Lake Partner Program. The other program is the Trent Aquatic Research Program, which you can find recent reports right on our own CRAI website. The Lake Partner Program, if you go to the FOCA website, you can connect to the past data. Unfortunately, for some reason, the province has delayed posting the 2021 data. So the most recent data there is 2020. I've seen them for individual lake associations can get their own data, but I'm not quite sure why the province is hiding this data. I mean, the election's over, there's no reason to keep the data hidden. But there are also no surprises. But the Lake Partner Program is by volunteers, people like you and I. And on most of our lakes, there's one or more volunteers, and they send the sample in the spring for analysis of phosphorus and calcium and chloride. And then the same volunteer sampler measures the water clarity or the Secchi depth several times over the season, often as every 2 or 3 weeks, and reports that back to the ministry at the end of the season. And this has been, at least for most of our lakes, we've got more than 20 years of data now here in this system, and you can look at how it's been trending, if it has been trending, or whether it's been stable. And on most of our lakes, these measurements are quite stable, but they're also quite variable. For example, calcium levels are quite variable in our area. Lakes like Salmon Lake and Picard Lake have very high calcium levels. And for example, the Mississauga chain of lakes all have very low calcium levels. And then finally, we have the Trent Aquatic Research Program, which Gary referred to. And it's this report that was put out this year in 2022 includes all the data up to last year. And they are measuring about 20 different variables, including some of those that are already measured in the Lake Partner Program once a year. The Trent U people were on our lakes this last 2 weeks and doing their annual water sampling. And you can see the list of the significant list of variables that are being measured. Here's an example of their results. This happens to be the phosphorus results for 2021. It's interesting because most of our lakes are pretty consistent. 2020 was a weird year because of extreme rainfall events at the time that they were doing the sampling. But if you look at 2021, we noted, for example, that one lake in our area, Bottle Lake, which drains in the Catchacoma, and Bottle Lake, of course, is completely in the Kawartha Highlands Park. It only has a couple of cottages on it, but it's showing very high phosphorus levels compared to the other lakes, and it's being subjected to a significant dedicated study this year. So you can find the data for the reports from the Trent Aquatic Research Program on the CRAI website, and you can find the data for the Lake Partner Program for your lakes on the FOCA website. So that's where we're at in terms of these, in terms of the sources of data. So that's my quick overview of water levels and where to find information on water levels and where to find information on the ongoing water quality studies.
Okay, Ted, thank you very much for that. Appreciate that great presentation. We always like to know what's happening with our water levels. And want to just let everybody know we're going to wrap up here very quickly. I'm just going to move on to the next slide just to let everybody know that our next meeting is going to be Saturday, September 17th. It is going to be an all candidates meeting because we have a municipal election coming up October 24th. It'll be at the Cavendish Community Center. We are looking to have it as a live meeting so that you can meet all of the candidates. We've had a number of new people put their names in. I think we're up to 14 people who have now put their names in to be on Trent Lakes Council, so that's great. Just a quick thing for everybody to know, anybody who owns or rents a property in Trent Lakes can vote. Many of the seasonal people believe because they live in the city, they can't vote up here. That's totally incorrect. Everybody who owns a property or rents a property in Trent Lakes can vote. If you want to make sure that you're on the voters list, go to voterlookup.ca. and you'll be able to get your name in there. It'll take you about 4 to 5 minutes, and you'll be 100% in. And also make sure that when you go in there, ensure that your school support is correct, because we do also send a lot of our tax money to the school boards. So that's it for today's meeting. I want to thank everybody for participating, for all the people who attended. I want to thank all of our presenters. And again, our next meeting, September 17th, all candidates meeting, make sure you're there so you can ask the people putting their names forward the tough questions to make sure that they earn your vote. And our next annual general meeting will be next year, August 19, 2023. And with that, we will close off today's meeting. Thanks, everybody, and appreciate all your attendance.